Okay, so Anuruddha says that's his conception of the ideal monk. Okay, now they turn to Venerable Mahakassapa. You know, this kind of standard image of Mahakassapa. How does Mahakassapa usually look in the images of him? Stern, yeah. Not the bright, welcoming, pleasant, smiling face, but kind of figure that, you know, when you have to go before him, you feel like a little bit afraid. Because he could read into one's mind, and he will know just about all one's thoughts. I used to know a monk like that in Sri Lanka. He was actually a German monk who was an observer of the ascetic practices, the Dhutangas. And we used to call him the Mahakassapa of the present era. He's since passed away in 2005, 2006. In his 90s he passed away, but when he first became a monk, he lived for, I think, 11 years at the place called the Island Hermitage. This is an island in a lagoon in southwest Sri Lanka, and he almost never left the Island Hermitage, but always stayed there. And he was, at that time, he was very closely associated with Venerable Nyanamoli, the translator of the Suddhimagga, who was alive. This would have been in the late actually beginning from about 1953 on till 1964. He stayed at the Island Hermitage. And then in 1964, he felt that he had enough of staying fixed in one place. And so then he made the determination that throughout the year, except during the 4 months of the rainy season, he would always keep on traveling without any fixed abode. And so he did this each year, 8 months. He would always travel. If he found a place that he liked, he would stay there for a few days, maybe even a few weeks. He never traveled by bus or by car, always traveling by foot. He had walked the length and breadth of Sri Lanka quite a few times. This was before the war broke out, so he would travel from the north, Jaffna in the north, down to Matra in the south, from the west coast to the east coast. No fixed abode. And sometimes he would have to come into Colombo for medical treatment, especially during his later years. And then he would stay in one monastery in Colombo. And when we heard that he was there, we would go to him to get advice from him. But we were always a little bit afraid because he was, I don't know whether stern would be the word. He wasn't so much stern with others, but he was stern with himself. But it showed a little bit in his mannerism. And he seemed to have the ability, I don't know whether we can say that he actually read individual thoughts, but he knew very, very precisely what a person was going through at the time when they would go to speak to him. So his advice was always very precisely tuned to the needs of that person. Okay, so I think Mahakassapa was somebody, this we could say was somebody a little bit like Mahakassapa. So Mahakassapa describes his conception of the ideal monk, and he mentions what are called in Pali the Dhutangas. These are the ascetic practices. Sometimes they're called also Dutta Guna, we say the virtues, the ascetic virtues. Or Duttanga means literally the ascetic the factors of asceticism. The word dutta literally comes from a word, a verb, which means to shake off. So observing these practices is supposed to be the means to shake off certain defilements, like craving, laziness, discontent. Okay, so here, a bhikkhu is a forest dweller himself. That is, he makes the determination always to live in the forest, not to live in a monastery, in a town or a city, or even in a village. And he speaks in praise of forest dwelling to others. So you could say even the ascetic monk is concerned not only with his own good by observing the ascetic practices, but also he tries to promote the good of others by encouraging the others in the ascetic practices. Okay, he is an alms food eater himself and speaks in praise of eating alms food. Actually, we use the word pindapata, comes to be used generally to describe all of the food that is given to a monk or a nun. We say that it's all pindapata, which means alms food. But in a way that's, maybe you could say it's a polite lie or polite self-deception, since the real meaning of pindapata is food that one gets by going on alms round from house to house. And this is an institutionalized practice in some of the southern Buddhist countries like Thailand, Burma, maybe Laos, Cambodia. So every day people come out of their houses, they prepare a large quantity of food, they set up a little table outside their house with pots of food on it, and then the monks come walking by, and as they go by, they'll scoop some rice into the alms bowl of the monk, and then take a little bags with some vyanjana, some curry, or some prepared dish, and put it into the bowl or into a separate container. But the real old-style pindapata is going without any people expecting one in advance, so that one just turns up at the door, unexpected, and then the people have to get whatever leftovers they have and heat it up and offer it to one. Or sometimes if they're expecting ascetics, then they'll have something prepared, but they keep it in the house. They don't set up a little table outside because they know that a line of monks is going to go by. Okay, so one who undertakes this practice makes the determination not to accept food, to accept invitations to the houses for a meal, not to accept food which lay people will bring to the temple or monastery to offer. So sometimes lay people will make an arrangement with the monastery to bring food on a certain day. So all of the regular monks, they don't go on alms round, but they just remain in the temple, knowing that on that day the lay people will bring a meal, and usually they prepare very delicious, sumptuous food. But if the monk has made this resolution to eat only the alms food, he won't stay behind for the lay people to come, but he'll go out from house to house collecting the food. Okay, so this was another practice Mahakassapa observes and praises to others. Then he is what is called a refuse rag wearer and speaks in praise of wearing refuse rags. Okay, now the normal kind of robe that monks wear is a robe which is prepared in advance. Like this robe, some person had bought it in a shop. Like in the Buddhist countries, they have what are called monk shops, which are shops that specialize. They have robes, alms bowls, sets of what they call the 8 requisites.
Divine eyes. Can you buy divine eyes there too?
Divine eyes. These, like, what do they call them? Straight edge razors. It's a little boring, because there are changing styles from us. And they have Buddhist, this is what they also have, Buddha statues and little models of stupas in which they put sometimes relics and other precious items. You have to get an American company to go in there. They'll change the style every season so that really turn it into a profitable business. Okay, so those are like ready-made robes. And even in some of the monasteries, the monks will receive new pieces of cloth, white cloth, which they then cut up, sew themselves, and then dye and wear. But one who makes the resolve to use what are called the refuse rag robe, this person goes, usually they go to what's called the charnel ground, where they wrap up corpses. I hope you people don't get afraid. They wrap up corpses in white cloth and discard them in the charnel ground. So then the monk who wants to make a robe will go to the charnel ground and cut off pieces of cloth from the corpses and then bring them back and sew them together, wash them, and then dye them in order to make a robe. Okay, and then he's the triple robe wearer. That is, he uses only the 3 basic robes. There's the underrobe, which is like a skirt, the upper robe, which is this robe. Then there's something like, it's a double thick robe, basically the same shape as this, but usually we fold it in half and we use it a little bit like a shawl when it gets cool. But then one is entitled to use, several of each robe. One can just take an old robe and then one uses it for when one is washing a new robe. But somebody who makes the determination to use only 3 robes won't have those extra robes. But if he's washing the robe, an upper robe, then he'll wear the double thick robe. And if he's washing the underrobe, then he has actually a bathing cloth, which is the same shape, and he'll wear the bathing cloth while the underrobe is being washed and dried. Okay, so these are the ascetic practices. And then Mahagosinga also speaks about certain more inward virtues, and these build up in a progressive order. He starts that the monk is one who has few wishes himself and speaks in praise of fewness of wishes. Not to have desire for excessive possessions. He is content himself and speaks in praise of contentment, secluded himself and speaks in praise of seclusion. He is aloof from society himself. This could be a little misleading. I think now aloof is not such a good choice of words, because it suggests, the word aloof suggests some kind of cold condescension, but that's not what is intended here. It's rather that the monk is not one who likes to mix and socialize very much, but he prefers seclusion. then he's energetic himself and speaks in praise of arousing energy. He observes virtue or the precepts himself and speaks in praise of the observance of virtuous behavior. He attains to samadhi, concentration, and praises concentration. He attains wisdom and speaks in praise of wisdom. And he has attained to liberation himself and speaks in praise of liberation. And he has attained to the knowledge and vision of liberation and speaks in praise of the knowledge and vision of liberation. So this is the way Mahakassapa praises the ideal monk. Maybe at this point I'll ask whether there are any questions. Okay, Richard. Okay, let's take Matt. You're closest.
Well, I had to develop the divine eye. The other monks, there seems to be a process by which you can reach this kind of level of attunement, but the divine eye just seems to be something you either possess or don't possess.
Yeah, but that actually isn't the case. There is a process or a method sort of described in some texts for attaining it. Of course, it helps if one has a natural aptitude for it. But the texts speak about first gaining the 4 jhanas, the 4 meditative absorptions, and then what one is supposed to do. The method is actually described in detail in the Visuddhimagga, based on the tradition of the ancient commentators. What one does is develop the jhana, excuse me. One develops the jhanas based on the perception of light. So it's focusing on a bright light and then gaining deep absorption into that light. And then based on that light, one extends that light over greater and greater distances. And as one does so, it illuminates those distant areas. And then one can extend that light in such a way, through the appropriate determination, that it will illuminate other realms of existence that are ordinarily invisible to us.
Earlier you had said that all the different statues have different expressions which are, which exhibit their personalities, and perhaps also intelligences. What would determine intelligence? Because if there is intelligence, if there is rebirth, what determines the intelligence factor? Because the memory factor you talked about.
Yeah.
But the intelligence factor is something I was interested in.
Yeah, I would say probably study, investigation, inquiry, using one's intellectual faculty to do stuff. And probably also a certain degree of merit would promote the intelligence.
At the stage that perhaps I'm at, when you think about penetration of view.
Think about
view. You're always operating from some view.
Yeah.
And the understanding is that everybody's right in their view, from what I understand.
Everybody is right in there.
In their perception of how they are viewing whatever they are viewing.
You mean everybody thinks that they're right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, how would one undercut one's own, one would just look at one's own view as just coming out of your own causes and conditions and resting at that, and then
I mean, this question takes us a little bit away from
It
this.
does, I know, but okay, we can talk about it another time. It's just,
I think to get what's called the right, at least from the Buddhist point of view, the right view, one has to have, well, I would say the understanding of the principles of the Dhamma, both through learning and through insight. Just to put it very simply in a nutshell. Okay, I'll just take one question, then I want to finish the sutta, go back and finish the sutta.
I have two simple questions about the second paragraph on 5, when Ravata is speaking.
Yeah.
He says, a bhikkhu delights in solitary meditation and takes delight in solitary meditation.
Yeah.
Are those supposed to mean two different things, or is that a repetition?
It's just the way the Pali language is used. They're really the same thing, but one uses one grammatical form, the other a slightly different grammatical form. But the words are the same.
Okay, and second, what is the point of dwelling in empty huts? Are those huts that have been deserted? As you mean huts that people have built and then they've moved to some larger or newer place?
No, these would be huts that are built in the forest, especially for the monks to use for meditation.
So it just means being a forest monk.
Yeah, but we could take this in a very broad sense to also include, in a bigger building, it would be like a quiet room. So any place which is quiet, where one has privacy, where one is able to undertake a practice of meditation without being interrupted and disturbed. In a broad sense, that could count as an empty, it's actually sunyagara, literally means an empty house rather than hut. But usually what are built are huts. Okay, so those are the two questions then. So let us go now to the next question, the next one to speak. So now Sariputta turns to Moggallana and says that each has spoken, now it's your turn. And so Moggallana describes his ideal monk. He says, 2 bhikkhus engage in a talk on, the Pali uses the expression here, abhidhamma. And I think this is a mistaken translation, higher dhamma, as though they're talking about a body of knowledge called the abhidhamma. This has to go. I've come to a better understanding of how this word is used in the canonical text. Okay, in the canonical text, let me just write it, abhidhamma. Okay, in the canon, as many of you know, at a certain point, abhidhamma came to At a certain point, Abhidhamma became a collection of texts within the Tripitaka, and then a certain body of a very technical knowledge with a fine analysis of mental states and factors of existence. The word Abhidhamma occurs in the suttas, but I don't think it has that special meaning, or that it means a kind of special Dhamma or a higher Dhamma. But rather, what I've noticed, I mean others have noticed this too, is that the word Abhidhamma is always used in relation to disciples who are speaking about the Dhamma, not something that the Buddha teaches. And so it seems to be used to mean that the word abhi simply has what we would call a reflexive meaning. That is, it means something like about. So they're engaged in a talk about the Dhamma. It's not a talk on some higher Dhamma, but abhi has a reflexive meaning. It just bends back upon the word Dhamma. So they're having a talk about the Dhamma, and they question each other, and when each one is questioned, they're able to answer fluently, without hesitation, and so their talk rolls on in accordance with the Dhamma. So this is Moggallana's answer. And what's a little bit interesting here is that Moggallana's answer doesn't reflect his own specialization. What is Moggallana's specialization?
Great spiritual power.
Yeah, great spiritual power, or what we would call psychic powers. Some call them mystical powers or magical powers. You know,
Is that the word iddhi?
yeah, the Pali word is iddhi.
Iddhi.
Yes, like the ability to
Fly through the air, go through the earth.
fly through the air, go through the, sink into the earth, walk across water, send out multiple copies of oneself to be several places at the same time, walk through the walls. But maybe that would have been, setting the standards, maybe setting up too rarefied a model for the accomplishment of a monk. So Moggallana answers instead in terms of being able to conduct a discussion on the Dhamma. Okay, so then finally they turn to Sariputta, who has been the one who up to this point has been asking the others to state their ideals. And so they ask Sariputta to explain his ideal. And Sariputta says, on page 310, here a monk wields mastery over his mind. He does not let the mind wield mastery over him. In the morning, he abides in whatever abiding or attainment he wants to abide in during the morning, same at the midday, some in the evening. And what's meant here by abiding or attainment means a particular meditative state. So if this monk wants to dwell in any of the 4 jhanas, he can dwell in that particular jhana. If he wants to dwell in any of the formless attainments, he can dwell in that particular formless attainment. If he wants to dwell in the attainment of cessation, he can enter cessation. So he has complete mastery over all of these meditative attainments. And then Sariputta compares this to a king or a king's minister, or a wealthy woman on Fifth Avenue, Manhattan, who has a chest full of variously colored garments. In the morning, he can put on whatever pair of garments he wants in the morning, same at midday, same in the evening. And so, in the same way, this monk can enter any time of day into any attainment he wants to. Okay, so at this point, they've all expressed their own ideas. And so then Sariputta says to the group of fellow monks, he says, we've all spoken according to our own ideals. Let us go to the Buddha and question him about this matter and hear what the Buddha has to say. And so they go to the Buddha, they report the whole conversation to him, and the text very faithfully repeats the answer of each monk, which is abridged here. And then finally, and after each one, the Buddha approves and says, good, good. Each one is speaking in a way that's natural to him, since each of these disciples has this particular ability or specialization. So he goes through Sariputta on page 312, paragraph 16. Then paragraph 17, Sariputta asks the Buddha, which of us has spoken well? Then the Buddha says, you have all spoken well, Sariputta, each in his own way. But now let me tell you the kind of monk that could adorn this sala-tree forest. Here, the monk has returned from his alms round, and after his meal, he sits down, he folds his legs crosswise, sets his body erect, establishes mindfulness before him, and resolves, I shall not break this sitting position until my mind is liberated from the asanas, from the taints, through non-clinging. That is the kind of monk that could illuminate this sala-tree forest. So the Buddha here is pointing to a monk who's not yet in our hut, but who sits there and makes that determination that in this very seat, I will reach the final goal. So maybe we should all go out now. We could skip lunch today. The weather is quite pleasant outside. We could find a little place under the shade, sit down, cross our legs, and make the determination. None of us will rise up until our mind is liberated from the taints through non-clinging. But maybe we'll put it off till next week. I'm hungry. Okay, any short questions, quick questions? Save the longer ones for after lunch.
In this last thing where the Buddha says this, it's almost a sense that it's immediate.
That it's
immediate. That you might make a determination to sit, but just the resolve itself brings nirvana immediately. That there is no need to go through the jhanas, there's no need to develop anything. Freedom is right here.
No, not quite. I mean, the monk, well, he makes that resolve, but he would sit there, he would probably enter into the jhanas, unless he's a practitioner of the dry insight meditation. But he has to make a very diligent effort. In fact, in some texts, that kind of resolution is expressed, willingly let, as though the blood and flesh dry up on my body, and let only the skin, bones, and sinews remain. But I will not budge from the seat until my mind is liberated from the taints through non-clinging. But I think we have to be a little careful how we interpret this, because this is, I would say that this is intended for a monk or a practitioner who has already accumulated all of what we would call the supporting conditions. So probably a monk who makes this determination would already have mastered at least a few of the jhanas and have already reached high levels of insight knowledges. And so the monk recognizes that he's very close to the breakthrough. And sort of to push him over the precipice, he has to make that determination not to move until he's liberated. I used to do that when I was in Sri Lanka, but then, after a half an hour, the pain, it's just too much. Yeah, tomorrow I'll make that resolution, but now, let me readjust my life. Oh, these mosquitoes are terrible. Let me get up and move in sides instead of sitting out here. Let me go up and spray on some anti-mosquito repellent. Okay, let us end for the morning. So we end with the sharing of the merits. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumodipa chiram rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumodipa chiram rakantu desanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumodipa chiram rakantu manparan. Etavata hehi sampadam punya sampadam sabbe devanumodantu sabba sappati siddhya sabbe bhutanumodantu sabba sappati siddhya sabbe satanumodantu sabba sappati siddhya. Bhavagopadaya vichitato etam tare satakayupapanna rupya rupicha sanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu pasantu nibuddhim. Yeah, I should just mention that this ends the spring-summer semester, so there'll be like about a month break through August, and then we'll start the class again in, I think it's September 4th, is that the date? And then I will send out the program with the dates of the classes and the suttas that we'll be studying. I'll send it out. Heidi's? Yeah. I'll send it to Heidi and then she will send it to all of you. So if anybody who's not registered with Heidi, your email address, then please do so.